Mexico is a country in the southern portion of North America, covering 1,972,550 kilometers square. It is the world's 13th largest country by area. With a population of over 130 million, it is the 10th most populous country and has the most Spanish speakers worldwide. Mexico is a constitutional republic comprising 31 states and Mexico City, its capital and largest city, which is among the world's most populous metropolitan areas. The country borders the United States to the north and Guatemala and Belize to the southeast. It has maritime borders with the Pacific Ocean to the west, Caribbean Sea to the southeast and Gulf of Mexico to the east. Human presence in pre-Columbian Mexico dates back to 8000 BC as one of 6 cradles of civilization. Mesoamerica hosted civilizations including Olmec, Maya, Zapotec, Teotihuacan, and Pura Picha. Aztec domination of the area preceded Spanish conquest of Aztec Empire, which established the colony of New Spain centered in the former capital, Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City. Mexican War of Independence in early 19th century was followed by political and socio-economic upheaval. The Mexican-American War resulted in significant territorial losses in 1848. Liberal reforms introduced in the Constitution of 1857 prompted domestic conflict, French intervention, and establishment of an empire, countered by Republican resistance led by Benito Juárez. The rise of Porfirio Díaz's dictatorship in 19th century sparked Mexican Revolution in 1910, which led to profound changes such as 1917 Constitution. Over 20th century, Mexico experienced significant economic growth as well as issues of repression and electoral fraud. The late 20th century saw a shift towards neoliberal policies, exemplified by the signing of North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 amidst unrest in Chiapas. Mexico is a federal republic with a presidential system of government, characterized by democratic framework and separation of powers into 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. The federal legislature consists of the bicameral Congress of Union, comprising Chamber of Deputies which represents the population, and Senate which provides equal representation for each state. The Constitution establishes 3 levels of government: federal union, state governments, and municipal governments. Mexico's federal structure grants autonomy to its 32 states, and its political system is deeply influenced by indigenous traditions and European Enlightenment ideals. Mexico is a newly industrialized and developing country with the world's 12th largest economy by both nominal GDP and PPP. Mexico ranks first in the Americas and 7th in the world by the number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It is also one of the world's 17 megadiverse countries, ranking 5th in natural biodiversity. It is a major tourist destination. As of 2022, it is the 6th most visited country in the world with 42.2 million international arrivals. Mexico's large economy and population, global cultural influence and steady democratization make it a regional and middle power, increasingly identifying as an emerging power. However, as with much of Latin America, poverty, systemic corruption, and crime remain widespread. Since 2006, ongoing conflict between drug trafficking syndicates has led to over 127,000 deaths. Mexico is a member of United Nations, G20, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, World Trade Organization, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, Organization of American States, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, and Organization of Ibero-American States. Mexico is located between latitudes 14 degrees and 33 degrees north and longitudes 86 degrees and 119 degrees west in the southern portion of North America. With total area of 1,972,550 kilometers square, it is the world's 13th largest country by total area. It has coastlines on the Pacific Ocean and Gulf of California as well as Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Sea, the latter 2 forming part of the Atlantic Ocean. Within these seas are 6,000 kilometers square of islands, including the remote Pacific Guadalupe Island and Revillagigedo Islands. Almost all of Mexico lies in the North American plate with small parts of Baja California Peninsula on the Pacific and Cocos plates. Geophysically, some geographers include the territory east of Isthmus of Tehuantepec, 12% of the total, within Central America. Geopolitically, however, Mexico is entirely considered part of North America, along with Canada and the United States. The majority of Mexican Central and Northern territories are located at high altitudes, and as such the highest elevations are found at Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt, which crosses Mexico east to west. Pico de Orizaba, 5,700 meters, Popocatépetl, 5,462 meters, Iztaccíhuatl, 5,286 meters, and Nevado de Toluca, 4,577 meters. Two mountain ranges known as Sierra Madre Oriental and Sierra Madre Occidental, which are the extension of Rocky Mountains from northern North America, cross the country from north to south, and a fourth mountain range, Sierra Madre del Sur, runs from Michoacán to Oaxaca. The Mexican territory is prone to volcanism. Mexico has 9 distinct regions: Baja California, Pacific Coastal Lowlands, Mexican Plateau, Sierra Madre Oriental, Sierra Madre Occidental, Cordillera Neovolcanica, Gulf Coastal Plain, Southern Highlands, and Yucatan Peninsula. An important geologic feature of Yucatan Peninsula is Chicxulub crater. The scientific consensus is that Chicxulub impactor was responsible for Cretaceous, Paleogene extinction event. Although Mexico is large, a little over 3,219 kilometers in length from its farthest land points, much of its landmass is incompatible with agriculture due to aridity, soil, or terrain. In 2018, 54.9% of land is agricultural, 11.8% arable, 1.4% permanent crops, 41.7% permanent pasture, and 33.3% forest. Mexico is irrigated by several rivers, with the longest being Rio Grande, which serves as natural eastern border with the United States. Usumacinta River in turn serves as natural southern border between Mexico and Guatemala. Climate of Mexico is varied due to the country's size and topography. Tropic of Cancer effectively divides the country into temperate and tropical zones. Land north of Tropic of Cancer experiences cooler temperatures during winter months. South of Tropic of Cancer, temperatures are fairly constant year-round and vary solely as function of elevation. This gives Mexico one of the world's most diverse weather systems. Maritime air masses bring seasonal precipitation from May until August. Many parts of Mexico, particularly the north, have dry climate with only sporadic rainfall, while parts of the tropical lowlands in the south average more than 2,000 millimeters of annual precipitation. Many cities in the north like Monterrey, Hermosillo, and Mexicali experience temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius or higher in summer. In Sonoran Desert, temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius or more. There are 7 major climate types in Mexico, with warm subhumid climate being coastal up to 900 meters, found mainly in the southern region of Mexico. Dry and desertic climates found in northern half of the country. Temperate humid and subhumid found mostly on pastures at an elevation of 1,800 meters and higher in central Mexico. Cold climate usually found at an elevation of 3,500 meters and beyond. Most of the country's territory has temperate to dry climate. Areas south of Tropic of Cancer with elevations up to 1,000 meters, southern parts of both coastal plains and Yucatan Peninsula, have yearly median temperature between 24 and 28 degrees Celsius. Temperatures remain high throughout the year, with only 5 degrees Celsius difference between winter and summer median temperatures. The Pacific coast is subject to natural hazards such as tsunamis, and Mexican coasts except the south coast of Bay of Campeche and northern Baja California are vulnerable to serious hurricanes during summer and fall. Although low-lying areas north of Tropic of Cancer are hot and humid during summer, generally lower yearly temperature averages from 20 to 24 degrees Celsius because of more moderate conditions during the winter. Mexico ranks 4th in the world in biodiversity and is one of the 17 megadiverse countries. With over 200,000 different species, Mexico is home to 12% of the world's biodiversity. Mexico ranks first in biodiversity in reptiles with 707 species, second in mammals with 438 species, fourth in amphibians with 290 species, and fourth in flora with 26,000 different species. Mexico is also considered the second country in the world in ecosystems and fourth in overall species. About 2,500 species are protected by Mexican legislation. In 2002, Mexico had the second fastest rate of deforestation in the world, second only to Brazil. In Mexico, 170,000 square kilometers are considered protected natural areas. These include 34 biosphere reserves, 67 national parks, 4 natural monuments, protected in perpetuity for their aesthetic, scientific, or historical value, 26 areas of protected flora and fauna, 4 areas for natural resource protection, conservation of soil, hydrological basins and forests, and 17 sanctuaries, zones rich in diverse species. Plants indigenous to Mexico are grown in many parts of the world and integrated into their national cuisines. Some of Mexico's native culinary ingredients include maize, tomato, beans, squash, chocolate, vanilla, avocado, guava, chayote, epazote, camote, jicama, nopal, zucchini, tejocote, huitlacoche, sapote, mamey sapote, and a great variety of chilies such as habanero and jalapeno. Most of these names come from the indigenous language of Nahuatl. Tequila, the distilled alcoholic drink made from cultivated agave cacti, is a major industry. Because of its high biodiversity, Mexico has been a frequent site of bioprospecting by international research bodies. The first highly successful instance was discovery in 1947 of tuber barbasco, Dioscorea composita, which has high content of diasgenin, revolutionizing the production of synthetic hormones in the 1950s and 1960s, and eventually leading to the invention of combined oral contraceptive pills. As of April 2024, Mexico has the 12th largest nominal GDP, $1.848 trillion. The 12th largest by purchasing power parity, $3.303 trillion, and GDP in PPP per capita of $24,971. The World Bank reported in 2023 that the country's gross national income in market exchange rates was the second highest in Latin America after Brazil at $1,744,711.4 million. Mexico is established as an upper-middle income country. After the slowdown of 2001, the country recovered and grew 4.2, 3.0, and 4.8% in 2004, 2005 and 2006, even though it is considered well below Mexico's potential growth. By 2050, Mexico could potentially become the world's 5th or 7th largest economy. The electronics industry of Mexico has grown enormously within the last decade. Mexico has the 6th largest electronics industry in the world after China, the United States, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Mexico is the second largest exporter of electronics to the United States, where it exported $71.4 billion worth of electronics in 2011. The Mexican electronics exports grew 73% between 2002 and 2012. The manufactured value-added sector, which electronics is part of, accounted for 18% of Mexico's GDP. Mexico produces the most automobiles of any North American nation. The industry produces technologically complex components and conducts research and development activities. The Big Three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, have operated in Mexico since the 1930s, while Volkswagen and Nissan built their plants in the 1960s. In Puebla alone, 70 industrial part makers cluster around Volkswagen. In the 2010s, expansion of the sector was surging. In September 2016, Kia opened a $1 billion factory in Nuevo León, with Audi opening an assembling plant in Puebla the same year. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Nissan currently also have plants in Mexico. The domestic car industry is represented by Dina SA, which built buses and trucks since 1962, and the new Mastretta company that builds the high-performance Mastretta MXT sports car. In 2006, trade with the United States and Canada accounted for almost 50% of Mexico's exports and 45% of its imports. National Autonomous University of Mexico was officially established in 1910, and the university became one of the most important institutes of higher learning in Mexico. UNAM provides world-class education in science, medicine, and engineering. Many scientific institutes and new institutes of higher learning, such as National Polytechnic Institute, founded in 1936, were established during the first half of 20th century. Most of the new research institutes were created within UNAM. 12 institutes were integrated into UNAM from 1929 to 1973. In 1959, Mexican Academy of Sciences was created to coordinate scientific efforts between academics. In 1995, Mexican chemist Mario J. Molina shared Nobel Prize in Chemistry with Paul J. Crutzen and F. Sherwood Rowland for their work in atmospheric chemistry, particularly concerning the formation and decomposition of ozone. Molina, an alumnus of UNAM, became the first Mexican citizen to win the Nobel Prize in Science. In recent years, largest scientific project developed in Mexico was the construction of Large Millimeter Telescope, Gran Telescopio Milimétrico, GMT, the world's largest and most sensitive single-aperture telescope in its frequency range. Designed to observe regions of space obscured by stellar dust. Mexico was ranked 56th in Global Innovation Index in 2024. As of 2017, Mexico was the 6th most visited country in the world and 15th highest income from tourism in the world, which is also the highest in Latin America. Vast majority of tourists from the United States and Canada, followed by Europe and Asia. A smaller number come from other Latin American countries. In 2017 Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Report, Mexico ranked 22nd in the world, which was 3rd in the Americas. The coastlines of Mexico are rich in sunny beach stretches. According to Constitution of Mexico Article 27, the entire coastlines are under federal ownership. On Yucatan Peninsula, one of the most popular beach destinations is the resort town of Cancun, especially among university students during spring break. To the south of Cancun is the coastal strip Riviera Maya, which includes the beach town of Playa del Carmen and ecological parks of Xcaret and Zelha. To the south of Cancun is the town of Tulum, notable for its ruins of Maya civilization. Other notable tourist destinations include Acapulco with crowded beaches and multi-story hotels on the shores. At the southern tip of Baja California Peninsula is the resort town of Cabo San Lucas, noted for its marlin fishing. Closer to the United States border is the weekend draw of San Felipe, Baja California. In Mexican cities along the Mexico or United States border, the most lucrative hospitality industry is now medical tourism, with remnants of the traditional motivations that drove tourists to Mexico's northern borderlands for nearly a century. Dominant medical tourism for tourism planning are the purchase of medication, dentistry, elective surgery, optometry, and chiropractic. Despite its complex topography, Mexico's roadway is extensive and most areas in the country are covered. The roadway network in Mexico has an extent of 366,095 kilometers, of which 116,802 kilometers are paved, making it 9th largest of any country. Of these, 10,474 kilometers are multi-lane expressways, 9,544 kilometers are 4-lane highways, and the rest have 6 or more lanes. Starting in the late 19th century, Mexico was one of the first Latin American countries to promote railway development, and the network covers 30,952 kilometers. The Secretary of Communications and Transport of Mexico proposed high-speed rail link that transport passengers from Mexico City to Guadalajara, Jalisco. The train, which will travel at 300 kilometers per hour, allow passengers to travel from Mexico City to Guadalajara in 2 hours. The whole project projected to cost 240 billion pesos and is paid jointly by Mexican government and local private sector, including one of the wealthiest men in the world, Mexico's billionaire business tycoon Carlos Slim. The federal government has been funding the construction of an inter-city railway line connecting cities such as Cozumel, Mérida, Chichen Itza, Cancun, and Palenque, another inter-city train connecting the city of Toluca and Mexico City, and restored the interoceanic train corridor which connects Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Mexico has 233 airports with paved runways. Of these, 10 carry 72% of national cargo and 97% of international cargo. Mexico City International Airport remains the busiest in Latin America and 36th busiest in the world, transporting 45 million passengers a year. 2 additional airports operate simultaneously to help relieve congestion from the Mexico City International Airport, Toluca International Airport and Felipe Ángeles International Airport. According to Mexico's National Geography and Statistics Institute, The country's estimated population in 2022 was 129,150,971 people. Since at least the 1970s, Mexico has been the most populous Spanish-speaking country in the world. Throughout 19th century, Mexico's population barely doubled. This trend continued during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. In 1900, Mexican population was slightly more than 13 million. The Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1920, greatly impacted population growth, with 1921 census reporting a loss of about 1 million inhabitants. The growth rate increased dramatically between the 1930s and 1980s, when the country registered growth rates of over 3%, 1950 to 1980. Mexican population doubled in 20 years, and at that rate, it was expected that by 2000 there would be 120 million people living in Mexico. Mexico's population grew from 70 million in 1982 to 123.5 million in 2017. Life expectancy increased from 36 years in 1895 to 75 years in 2020. Mexico's population is highly diverse, but research on Mexican ethnicity has felt the impact of nationalist discourses on identity. Since 1930s, Mexican government promoted the view that all Mexicans are part of mestizo community, within which they are distinguished only by residence in or outside of an indigenous community, degree of fluency in an indigenous language, and degree of adherence to indigenous customs. According to Mexico's 2020 census, 6.1% of Mexico's population speaks an indigenous language and 19.4% of the population identifies as indigenous. It was not until recently that the Mexican government began conducting surveys that account for other ethnic groups that live in the country, such as Afro-Mexicans comprised 2% of Mexico's population in 2020. Surveys that use skin color as reference are used to estimate white Mexicans in the country, with Encyclopedia Britannica estimating them at 32% of the population. Asians and Middle Easterners represent 1% of the population each. While mestizos are a prominent ethnic group in contemporary Mexico, subjective and ever-changing definition of this category has led to its estimations being imprecise. Spanish is the de facto national language spoken by most of the population, making Mexico the world's most populous Hispanophone country. Mexican Spanish refers to the varieties of the language spoken in the country, which differs from one region to another in sound, structure, and vocabulary. As of 2019, it is estimated that 11.7 million Mexicans live outside Mexico, in addition to 13.5 million born abroad and another 12 million descendants. The vast majority of this combined population, 98 to 99%, are in the U.S. The largest Mexican communities outside Mexico are in the metropolitan areas of Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Between 1965 and 2015, more than 16 million Mexicans migrated to the United States, by far the top destination for both temporary and permanent migration, representing one of the largest mass migrations in modern history. As a result of these major migration flows in recent decades, an estimated 37.2 million U.S. residents, or 11.2% of the country's population, identified as being of full or partial Mexican ancestry. Among the remaining 2% of Mexican expatriates not residing in the U.S., the most popular destinations are Canada, 86,780, primarily provinces of Ontario and Quebec, followed by Spain and Germany. The latter two countries account for 2/3 of all Mexicans living in Europe. It is estimated that 69,000 Mexicans live in Latin America, led by Guatemala, 18,870, followed by Bolivia, 10,610, Chile, 10,560, and Panama, 5,000. Historically and relative to other countries in the Western Hemisphere, Mexico has not been a destination of mass migration. As of 2020, an estimated 1.2 million foreigners settled in Mexico, up from 1 million in 2010. In 2021, Mexico officially received 68,000 new immigrants, a 16% increase from the prior year. The overall number of migrants, including those unauthorized to enter or stay in the country, may be higher than official figures. The vast majority of migrants in Mexico come from the United States, 900,000, making Mexico the top destination for U.S. citizens abroad. The second largest group comes from neighboring Guatemala, 54,500, followed by Spain, 27,600. Other major sources of migration are fellow Latin American countries, which include Colombia, 20,600, Argentina, 19,200, and Cuba, 18,100. Communities descended from the Lebanese diaspora and German-born Mennonites have had an outsized impact in the country's culture, particularly in its cuisine and traditional music. In 2020, there were 48 metropolitan areas in Mexico, in which close to 53% of the country's population lives. The most populous metropolitan area in Mexico is the metropolitan area of Valley of Mexico or Greater Mexico City, which in 2020 had a population of 21.8 million or 18% of the nation's population. The next four largest metropolitan areas in Mexico are Greater Monterrey, 5.3 million, Greater Guadalajara, 5.2 million, Greater Puebla, 3.2 million, and Greater Toluca, 2.3 million. Urban areas contain 76.81% of Mexico's total population. Roman Catholicism remains the country's dominant religious affiliation. According to 2020 census, there are 58,876 Jews in Mexico. The presence of Jews in Mexico dates back to the 16th century when Spaniards arrived to the Americas. However, the modern Jewish community began to be formed in the late 19th and early 20th century when Jews from Europe and the Ottoman Empire immigrated to the country due to instability and anti-Semitism. Islam in Mexico, 7,982, practiced mostly by Arab Mexicans. In the 2020 census, 36,764 Mexicans reported belonging to a spiritualist religion, a category that includes a tiny Buddhist population, and about 74,000 people reported practicing religions with ethnic roots, religions mostly African and indigenous origins. There is often a syncretism between shamanism and Catholic traditions. Another religion of popular syncretism in Mexico, especially in recent years, is Santeria, mainly due to large number of Cubans who settled in the territory after Cuban Revolution. One of the most exemplary cases of popular religiosity is the cult of Holy Dead, Santa Muerte. Other examples are representations of Passion of Christ and Celebration Day of Dead, which take place within the framework of Catholic Christian imaginary but under a very particular reinterpretation. As of 2020, literacy rate in Mexico is 95.25%, a slight increase from 94.86% in 2018 and significantly higher than 82.99% in 1980. Literacy between males and females is relatively equal. Mexican culture reflects a long and complex history of interactions between various peoples through migration, conquest, and trade. 3 centuries of Spanish rule resulted in the blending of Spanish culture with those of different indigenous groups. Efforts to assimilate the native population into Christian European culture during the colonial era were only partially successful, with many pre-Columbian customs, traditions, and norms persisting regionally, particularly in rural areas, or becoming syncretized. Conversely, many Spanish settlers integrated into local communities through acculturation or intermarriage. However, a high degree of stratification along the lines of class, ethnicity, and race perpetuated distinct subcultures. The Porfirian era, El Porfiriato, 1876 to 1911, which brought relative peace after 4 decades of civil unrest and war, saw the development of philosophy and art, often with government support. Since that time, as accentuated during Mexican Revolution, cultural identity has had its foundation in mestizaje. In light of the various ethnicities that formed Mexican people, José Vasconcelos in La Raza Cósmica, The Cosmic Race, 1925, defined Mexico and Latin America to be the melting pot of all races, thus extending the definition of the mestizo, not only biologically but culturally as well. Other Mexican intellectuals grappled with the idea of lo mexicano, which seeks to discover the national ethos of Mexican culture. Nobel laureate Octavio Paz explores the notion of a Mexican national character in The Labyrinth of Solitude. The architecture of Mesoamerican civilizations evolved in style from simple to complex. Teotihuacan, designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, is one of the foremost examples of ancient pyramid construction. The cities of the Maya stand out to modern architects as examples of integration between large urban centers, with elaborate stone construction, and a thick jungle, generally with a complex network of roads. Pre-Columbian Mesoamerica also saw distinctive architectural influences from the Olmec, the Puuc, and Oasian-American peoples. Palacio de Bellas Arts, Palace of Fine Arts, with numerous murals, artworks, and a major performance space. With the arrival of the Spanish, architectural theories of the Greco-Latin order with Arab influences were introduced. In the first few decades of Spanish presence in the continent, the high level of Christian missionary activity, especially by mendicant orders like the Dominicans or Franciscans, meant the construction of many monasteries, often with Romanesque, Gothic, or Mudéjar elements. In addition, the interaction between Spaniards and indigenous people gave rise to artistic styles such as the Tecuichqui, from the Nahuatl, worker or builder. Years later, Baroque and Mannerist styles prevailed in large cathedrals and civil buildings, while in rural areas, haciendas or stately estates with Mozarabic tendencies were built. In the 19th century, the neoclassical movement arose as the country gained independence and sought to establish itself as a republic. A famous example is the Hospicio Cabanas, an orphanage and hospital complex completed in 1829. The Art Nouveau and the Art Deco were styles introduced into the design of the Palacio de Bellas Arts to mark the identity of the Mexican nation with Greek Roman and pre-Columbian symbols. As a new sense of nationalism developed in the 20th century, a strengthened central government issued formal policies that sought to use architecture to show Mexico's modernity and differentiation from other nations. The development of Mexican modernist architecture was especially manifested in the mid-1950s construction of the Ciudad Universitaria, Mexico City, the main campus of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Designed by the most prestigious architects of the era, including Mario Poni, Eugenio Pechard, and Enrique del Moral, the buildings feature murals by artists Diego Rivera, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and José Chavez Morado. It has since been recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Juan O'Gorman was one of the first environmental architects in modern Mexico to develop the organic theory, trying to integrate buildings onto the landscape within the same approaches of Frank Lloyd Wright. In the search for a new architecture that does not resemble the styles of the past, it achieves a joint manifestation with the mural painting and the landscaping. Luis Barragan combined the shape of the space with forms of rural vernacular architecture of Mexico and Mediterranean countries, Spain, Morocco, integrating color that handles light and shade in different tones and opens a look at the international minimalism. He won the 1980 Pritzker Prize, the highest award in architecture. The origin of the current Mexican cuisine was established during the Spanish colonial era, a mixture of the foods of Spain with native indigenous ingredients. Foods indigenous to Mexico include corn, pepper vegetables, calabasas, avocados, sweet potato, turkey, many beans, and other fruits and spices. Similarly, some cooking techniques used today are inherited from pre-Columbian peoples, such as the nixtamalization of corn, the cooking of food in ovens at ground level, grinding in molcajete and metate. With the Spaniards came the pork, beef, and chicken meats, peppercorn, sugar, milk, and all its derivatives, wheat and rice, citrus fruits, and another constellation of ingredients that are part of the daily diet of Mexicans. From this meeting of two millennia-old culinary traditions were born pozole, mole sauce, barbacoa, and tamale in its current forms, chocolate, a large range of breads, tacos, and the broad repertoire of Mexican street foods. Beverages such as atole, champorado, milk chocolate, and aguas frescas were born. Desserts such as acitron and the full range of crystallized sweets, rompope, cajeta, jericaya, and the wide repertoire of delights created in the convents of nuns in all parts of the country. In 2005, Mexico presented the candidature of its gastronomy for World Heritage Site of UNESCO, the first time a country had presented its gastronomic tradition for this purpose. The result was negative, because the committee did not place the proper emphasis on the importance of corn in Mexican cuisine. 343, on the 16th of November, 2010 Mexican gastronomy was recognized as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. In addition, Daniela Soto Innes was named the best female chef in the world by the world's best 50 restaurants in April 2019 and Elena Regadas in 2023. The earliest human artifacts in Mexico are chips of stone tools found near campfire remains in the Valley of Mexico and radiocarbon dated to circa 10,000 years ago. Mexico is the site of the domestication of maize, tomato, and beans, which produced an agricultural surplus. This enabled the transition from Paleo-Indian hunter-gatherers to sedentary agricultural villages beginning around 5000 BC. The formative period of Mesoamerica is considered one of the 6 independent cradles of civilization. This era saw the origin of distinct cultural traits such as religious and symbolic traditions, maize cultivation, artistic and architectural complexes, as well as a vigesimal, base 20, numeric system that spread from the Mexican cultures to the rest of the Mesoamerican cultural area. In this period, villages became more dense in terms of population, becoming socially stratified with an artisan class, and developing into chiefdoms. The most powerful rulers had religious and political power, organizing the construction of large ceremonial centers. The earliest complex civilization in Mexico was the Olmec culture, which flourished on the Gulf Coast from around 1500 BC. Olmec cultural traits diffused through Mexico into other formative era cultures in Chiapas, Oaxaca, and the Valley of Mexico. In the subsequent pre-classical period, the Maya and Zapotec civilizations developed complex centers at Calakmul and Monte Alban, respectively. During this period, the first true Mesoamerican writing systems were developed in the Epi-Olmec and Zapotec cultures. The Mesoamerican writing tradition reached its height in the classic Maya hieroglyphic script. The earliest written histories date from this era. The tradition of writing was important after the Spanish conquest in 1521, with indigenous scribes learning to write their languages in alphabetic letters, while also continuing to create pictorial texts. In central Mexico, the height of the classic period saw the ascendancy of Teotihuacan, which formed a military and commercial empire. Teotihuacan, with a population of more than 150,000 people, had some of the largest pyramidal structures in the pre-Columbian Americas. After the collapse of Teotihuacan around 600 AD, competition ensued between several important political centers in central Mexico such as Xochicalco and Cholula. At this time, during the Epi-Classic, Nahua peoples began moving south into Mesoamerica from the north, and became politically and culturally dominant in central Mexico, as they displaced speakers of Otomanguean languages. During the early post-classic era, ca. 1000 to 1519 AD, central Mexico was dominated by the Toltec culture, Oaxaca by the Mixtec, and the lowland Maya area had important centers at Chichen Itza and Mayapan. Toward the end of the post-classic period, the Aztecs, or Mexica, established dominance, establishing a political and economic empire based in the city of Tenochtitlan, modern Mexico City, extending from central Mexico to the border with Guatemala. Although the Spanish Empire had established colonies in the Caribbean starting in 1493, the Spanish first learned of Mexico during the Juan de Grijalva expedition of 1518. The Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire began in February 1519 when Hernán Cortés founded the Spanish city of Veracruz. The 1521 capture of Tenochtitlan and posterior founding of the Spanish capital Mexico City on its ruins was the beginning of a 300-year-long colonial era during which Mexico was known as Nueva España, New Spain. Two factors made Mexico a jewel in the Spanish Empire: the existence of large, hierarchically organized Mesoamerican populations that rendered tribute and performed obligatory labor, and the discovery of vast silver deposits in northern Mexico. The Kingdom of New Spain was created from the remnants of the Aztec Empire. The two pillars of Spanish rule were the state and the Roman Catholic Church, both under the authority of the Spanish crown. In 1493, the Pope had granted sweeping powers to the Spanish monarchy for its overseas empire, with the proviso that the crown spread Christianity in its new realms. In 1524, King Charles I created the Council of the Indies based in Spain to oversee state power in its overseas territories. In New Spain, the crown established a high court in Mexico City, the Real Audiencia, Royal Audience or Royal Tribunal, and then in 1535 created the Viceroyalty of New Spain. The Viceroy was the highest official of the state. In the religious sphere, the Diocese of Mexico was created in 1530 and elevated to the Archdiocese of Mexico in 1546, with the Archbishop as the head of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Castilian Spanish was the language of rulers. The Catholic faith was the only one permitted, with non-Catholics and Catholics, excluding Indians, holding unorthodox views being subject to the Mexican Inquisition, established in 1571. Spanish military forces, sometimes accompanied by native allies, led expeditions to conquer territory or quell rebellions through colonial era. Notable Amerindian revolts in sporadically populated northern New Spain include Chichimeca War, 1576 to 1606, Tepehuan Revolt, 1616 to 1620, and Pueblo Revolt, 1680. Celtal Rebellion of 1712 was a regional Maya revolt. Most rebellions were small-scale and local, posing no major threat to ruling elites. To protect Mexico from the attacks of English, French and Dutch pirates and protect the Crown's monopoly of revenue, only 2 ports were open to foreign trade. Veracruz on Atlantic connecting to Spain and Acapulco on the Pacific connecting to Philippines. Among the best-known pirate attacks are 1663 sack of Campeche and 1683 attack on Veracruz. Of greater concern to the Crown was the issue of foreign invasion, especially after Britain seized in 1762 the Spanish ports of Havana and Manila in the 7 Years' War. It created a standing military, increased coastal fortifications and expanded northern presidios and missions into Alta California. The volatility of urban poor in Mexico City was evident in 1692 riot in Zocalo. The riot over the price of maize escalated to a full-scale attack on the seats of power with Viceregal Palace and Archbishop's residence attacked by mob. On the 16th of September, 1810, secular priest Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla declared against bad government in small town of Dolores, Guanajuato. This event, known as Cry of Dolores, is commemorated each year on the 16th of September as Mexico's Independence Day. The upheaval in Spanish Empire that resulted in independence of most of New World territories was due to Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Spain in 1808. Hidalgo and his soldiers were eventually captured. Hidalgo was defrocked and they were executed by firing squad on the 31st of July, 1811. The first 35 years after Mexico's independence were marked by political instability and the changing of Mexican state from transient monarchy to fragile federated republic. There were military coups d'état, foreign invasions, ideological conflict between conservatives and liberals and economic stagnation. Former Royal Army General Agustin de Iturbide became regent, as newly independent Mexico sought a constitutional monarch from Europe. When no member of European royal house desired the position, Iturbide was declared Emperor Augustin I. The United States was the first country to recognize Mexico's independence, sending an ambassador to the court and sending a message to Europe via Monroe Doctrine not to intervene in Mexico. The emperor's rule was short, 1822 to 1823, and was overthrown by army officers in the Plan of Casa Mata. After forced abdication of the monarch, Central America and Chiapas left the Union to form Federal Republic of Central America. In 1824, First Mexican Republic was established. Former Insurgent General Guadalupe Victoria became the first president of the Republic, the first of many army generals to hold presidency. In 1829, former Insurgent General and fierce liberal Vicente Guerrero, a signatory of Plan of Iguala that achieved independence, became president in a disputed election. During his short term in office from April to December 1829, he abolished slavery. His conservative vice president, former royalist General Anastasio Bustamante, led a coup against him and Guerrero was judicially murdered. Mexico's ability to maintain independence and establish viable government was in question. Spain attempted to reconquer its former colony during 1820s but eventually recognized its independence. France attempted to recoup losses it claimed for its citizens during Mexico's unrest and blockaded Gulf Coast during Pastry War of 1838 to 1839. General Antonio López de Santa Anna emerged as a national hero because of his role in both these conflicts. Santa Anna came to dominate the politics for next 25 years until overthrow in 1855. Mexico contended with indigenous groups that controlled the territory that Mexico claimed in the north. The Comanche controlled huge territory in sparsely populated central and northern Texas. Wanting to stabilize and develop that area, and few people from central Mexico chose to resettle to this remote and hostile territory, The Mexican government encouraged Anglo-American immigration into present-day Texas, a region that bordered the United States. Mexico by law was a Catholic country. Anglo-Americans were Protestant English speakers from southern United States. Some brought their black slaves, which after 1829 was contrary to Mexican law. In 1835, Santa Anna sought to centralize government rule in Mexico, suspending 1824 constitution and promulgating 7 laws which placed power in his hands. As a result, civil war spread across the country. 3 new governments declared independence: Republic of Texas, Republic of Rio Grande, and Republic of Yucatan. The largest blow to Mexico was the U.S. invasion of Mexico in 1846 in the Mexican-American War. Mexico lost much of its sparsely populated northern territory, sealed in 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Despite that disastrous loss, Santa Anna returned to presidency yet again before ousted and exiled in liberal revolution of Ayutla. The overthrow of Santa Anna and the establishment of a civilian government by liberals allowed them to enact laws that they considered vital for Mexico's economic development. The liberal reform attempted to modernize Mexico's economy and institutions along liberal principles. They promulgated a new constitution of 1857, separating church and state, stripping the church and the military of their special privileges, fueros, mandating the sale of church-owned property and sale of indigenous community lands, and secularizing education. Conservatives revolted, touching off civil war between rival liberal and conservative governments, 1858 to 1861. The liberals defeated the conservative army on the battlefield, but conservatives sought another solution to gain power via foreign intervention by the French, asking Emperor Napoleon III to place a European monarch as head of state in Mexico. The French army defeated the Mexican army and placed Maximilian Habsburg on the newly established throne of Mexico, supported by Mexican conservatives and propped up by the French army. The Liberal Republic under Benito Juárez was a government in internal exile, but with the end of the Civil War in the United States in April 1865, the reunified U.S. government began aiding the Mexican Republic. 2 years later, the French army withdrew its support, but Maximilian remained in Mexico. Republican forces captured him and he was executed. The restored republic saw the return of Juárez, the personification of the embattled republic, as president. The conservatives had been not only defeated militarily but also discredited politically for their collaboration with the French invaders, and liberalism became synonymous with patriotism. The Mexican army that had its roots in the colonial Royal Army and then the army of the early republic was destroyed, and new military leaders had emerged from the War of the Reform and the conflict with the French, most notably Porfirio Diaz, a hero of the Cinco de Mayo, who now sought civilian power and challenged Juárez on his re-election in 1867. Diaz then rebelled but was crushed by Juárez. Having won re-election, Juárez died in office in July 1872, and liberal Sebastián Lerdo de Tejada became president, declaring a religion of the state for the rule of law, peace, and order. When Lerdo ran for re-election, Diaz rebelled against the civilian president, issuing the Plan of Tuxtepec. Diaz had more support and waged guerrilla warfare against Lerdo. On the verge of Diaz's victory on the battlefield, Lerdo fled from office into exile. After the turmoil in Mexico from 1810 to 1876, the 35-year rule of liberal General Porfirio Diaz, 1876 to 1911, allowed Mexico to rapidly modernize in a period characterized as one of order and progress. The Porfiriato was characterized by economic stability and growth, significant foreign investment and influence, an expansion of the railroad network and telecommunications, and investments in the arts and sciences. Diaz ruled with a group of advisors that became known as the Científicos, scientists. The most influential Científico was Secretary of Finance José Yves Limantour. The Porfirian regime was influenced by positivism. They rejected theology and idealism in favor of scientific methods being applied towards national development. An integral aspect of the liberal project was secular education. The Diaz government led a protracted conflict against the Yaqui that culminated with the forced relocation of thousands of Yaqui to Yucatan and Oaxaca. As the centennial of independence approached, Diaz gave an interview where he said he was not going to run in the 1910 elections, when he would be 80. Political opposition had been suppressed and there were few avenues for a new generation of leaders. But his announcement set off a frenzy of political activity, including the unlikely candidacy of the scion of a rich landowning family, Francisco I. Madero. Madero won a surprising amount of political support when Diaz changed his mind and ran in the election, jailing Madero. The September centennial celebration of independence was the last celebration of the Porfiriato. The Mexican Revolution starting in 1910 saw a decade of civil war, the wind that swept Mexico. The Mexican Revolution was a decade-long transformational conflict. It began with scattered uprisings against President Diaz after the fraudulent 1910 election, his resignation in May 1911, demobilization of rebel forces, an interim presidency of a member of the Old Guard and the democratic election of a rich, civilian landowner, Francisco I. Madero in fall 1911. In February 1913, a military coup d'état overthrew Maduro's government, with the support of the U.S., resulting in Maduro's murder by agents of Federal Army General Victoriano Huerta. During the revolution, the U.S. Republican administration of Taft supported the Huerta coup against Madero, but when Democrat Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated as president in March 1913, Wilson refused to recognize Huerta's regime and allowed arms sales to the Constitutionalists. Wilson ordered troops to occupy the strategic port of Veracruz in 1914, which was lifted. A coalition of anti-Huerta forces in the north, the Constitutional Army led by Governor of Coahuila Venustiano Carranza, and a peasant army in the south under Emiliano Zapata defeated the Federal Army in 1914, leaving only revolutionary forces. Following the revolutionaries' victory against Huerta, they sought to broker a peaceful political solution, but the coalition splintered, plunging Mexico again into a civil war. Constitutionalist General Pancho Villa, commander of the Division of the North, broke with Carranza and allied with Zapata. Carranza's best General Álvaro Obregón defeated Villa, his former comrade in arms, in the Battle of Celaya in 1915, and Villa's northern forces melted away. Carranza became the de facto head of Mexico, and the U.S. recognized his government while Zapata's forces in the south reverted to guerrilla warfare. After Pancho Villa was defeated by revolutionary forces in 1915, he led an incursion raid into Columbus, New Mexico, prompting the U.S. to send 10,000 troops led by General John J. Pershing in an unsuccessful attempt to capture Villa. Carranza pushed back against U.S. troops being in northern Mexico. The expeditionary forces withdrew as the U.S. entered World War I. Although often viewed as an internal conflict, the revolution had significant international elements. Germany attempted to get Mexico to side with it, sending a coded telegram in 1917 to incite war between the U.S. and Mexico, with Mexico to regain the territory it lost in the Mexican-American War, but Mexico remained neutral in the conflict. In 1916, the winners of the Mexican Revolution met at a constitutional convention to draft the Constitution of 1917, which was ratified in February 1917. The Constitution empowered the government to expropriate resources including land, gave rights to labor, and strengthened anti-clerical provisions of the 1857 Constitution. With amendments, it remains the governing document of Mexico. It is estimated that the Revolutionary War killed 900,000 people out of Mexico's 15 million population at the time. Consolidating power, President Carranza had peasant leader Emiliano Zapata assassinated in 1919. Carranza had gained the support of the peasantry during the revolution, but once in power, he did little to institute land reform, which had motivated many to fight in the revolution. Carranza returned some confiscated land to their original owners. President Carranza's best general, Obregón, served briefly in his administration but returned to his home state of Sonora to position himself to run in the 1920 presidential election. Since Carranza could not run for re-election, he chose a civilian to succeed him, intending to remain the power behind the presidency. Obregón and two other Sonoran revolutionary generals drew up the plan of Agua Prieta, overthrowing Carranza, who died fleeing Mexico City in 1920. General Adolfo de la Huerta became interim president, followed by the election of General Álvaro Obregón. The first quarter-century of the post-revolutionary period, 1920 to 1946, was characterized by revolutionary generals serving as presidents of Mexico, including Álvaro Obregón, 1920 to 24, Plutarco Elias Calles, 1924-28, Lázaro Cárdenas, 1934-40, and Manuel Ávila Camacho, 1940-46. The post-revolutionary project of the Mexican government sought to bring order to the country, end military intervention in politics, and create organizations of interest groups. Workers, peasants, urban office workers, and even the army for a short period were incorporated as sectors of the single party that dominated Mexican politics from its founding in 1929. Obregón instigated land reform and strengthened the power of organized labor. He gained recognition from the United States and took steps to settle claims with companies and individuals that lost property during the revolution. He imposed his fellow former Sonoran revolutionary general, Colles, as his successor, prompting an unsuccessful military revolt. As president, Colles provoked a major conflict with the Catholic Church and Catholic guerrilla armies when he strictly enforced anti-clerical articles of the 1917 Constitution, which ended with an agreement. Although the Constitution prohibited the re-election of the president, Obregón wished to run again and the Constitution was amended to allow non-consecutive re-election. He won the 1928 elections but was assassinated by a Catholic activist, causing a political crisis of succession. Colles could not become president again, so he sought to set up a structure to manage presidential succession, founding the Institutional Revolutionary Party, which went on to dominate Mexico for the rest of the 20th century. Despite not holding the presidency, Colles remained the key political figure during the period known as the Maximato, 1929 to 1934, that ended during the presidency of Lázaro Cárdenas, who expelled Colles from the country and implemented many economic and social reforms. This included the Mexican oil expropriation in March 1938, which nationalized the U.S. and Anglo-Dutch oil company known as the Mexican Eagle Petroleum Company, which would result in the creation of the state-owned Pemex. Cárdenas's successor, Manuel Ávila Camacho, 1940 to 1946, was more moderate, and relations between the U.S. and Mexico vastly improved during World War II, when Mexico was a significant ally. From 1946, the election of Miguel Alemán, the first civilian president in the post-revolutionary period, Mexico embarked on an aggressive program of economic development, known as the Mexican Miracle, which was characterized by industrialization, urbanization, and the increase of inequality between urban and rural areas. The Green Revolution, a technological movement that led to a significant worldwide increase in crop production, began in the Yaqui Valley of Sonora in the middle of the 20th century. With robust economic growth, Mexico sought to showcase it to the world by hosting the 1968 Summer Olympics. The government poured huge resources into building new facilities, prompting political unrest among university students and others. Demonstrations in central Mexico City went on for weeks before the planned opening of the Games, with the government of Gustavo Díaz Ordaz cracking down. The culmination was the Tlatelolco massacre, which killed around 300 protesters based on conservative estimates and perhaps as many as 884. Although the economy continued to flourish for some, social inequality remained a factor of discontent. PRI rule became increasingly authoritarian and at times oppressive in what is now referred to as the Mexican Dirty War. In the 1980s, the first cracks emerged in the PRI's complete political dominance. In Baja California, the PAN candidate was elected as governor. When de la Madrid chose Carlos Salinas de Gortari as the candidate for the PRI, and therefore a foregone presidential victor, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, son of former President Lázaro Cárdenas, broke with the PRI and challenged Salinas in the 1988 elections. In 1988 there was massive electoral fraud, with results showing that Salinas had won the election by the narrowest percentage ever. There were massive protests in Mexico City over the stolen election. Salinas took the oath of office on 1 December 1988-86. In 1990 the PRI was famously described by Mario Vargas Llosa as the perfect dictatorship, but by then there had been major challenges to the PRI's hegemony. Salinas embarked on a program of neoliberal reforms that fixed the exchange rate of the peso, controlled inflation, opened Mexico to foreign investment, and began talks with the US and Canada to join their free trade agreement, which culminated in the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. On the 1st of January, 1994, the same day, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation in Chiapas began armed peasant rebellion against the federal government, which captured a few towns but brought world Attention to the situation in Mexico. The armed conflict was short-lived and has continued as a non-violent opposition movement against neoliberalism and globalization. In 1994, following the assassination of the PRI's presidential candidate Luis Donaldo Colosio, Salinas was succeeded by victorious PRI candidate Ernesto Zedillo. Salinas left Zedillo's government to deal with the Mexican peso crisis, requiring a $50 billion IMF bailout. Major macroeconomic reforms were started by Zedillo, and the economy rapidly recovered and growth peaked at almost 7% by the end of 1999. After 71 years of rule, the incumbent PRI lost the 2000 presidential election to Vicente Fox of the opposing Conservative National Action Party, PAN. In the 2006 presidential election, Felipe Calderón from the PAN was declared the winner, with a very narrow margin, 0.58%, over leftist politician Andrés Manuel López Obrador of the Party of the Democratic Revolution, PRD. 91. López Obrador, however, contested the election and pledged to create an alternative government. After 12 years, in the 2012 presidential election, the PRI again won the presidency with the election of Enrique Peña Nieto. However, he won with a plurality of around 38% and did not have a legislative majority. During the 21st century, Mexico has contended with high crime rates, bureaucratic corruption, narco-trafficking, and a stagnant economy. Many state-owned industrial enterprises were privatized starting in the 1990s with neoliberal reforms, but Pemex, the state-owned petroleum company, is only slowly being privatized, with exploration licenses being issued. In a push against government corruption, the ex-CEO of Pemex, Emilio Lozoya Austin, was arrested in 2020. After founding the new political party Morena, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, commonly known as AMLO, won the 2018 presidential election with over 50% of the vote. His political coalition, led by his left-wing party founded after the 2012 elections, included parties and politicians from across the political spectrum. The coalition also won a majority in both the upper and lower Congress chambers. His success is attributed to the country's opposing political forces exhausting their chances, as well as AMLO's adoption of a moderate discourse with a focus on reconciliation. The first confirmed case of COVID-19 in Mexico occurred on the 28th of February, 2020. The COVID-19 vaccination in Mexico began in December 2020. Claudia Sheinbaum, López Obrador's political successor, won the 2024 presidential election in a landslide and upon taking office in October became the first woman to lead the country in Mexico's history. She was sworn in as Mexico's president on the 1st of October, 2024. In the 1930s, Mexico made a commitment to rural healthcare, mandating that mostly urban medical students receive training in it and to make them agents of the state to assess marginal areas. Since the early 1990s, Mexico entered a transitional stage in the health of its population, and some indicators such as mortality patterns are identical to those found in highly developed countries like Germany or Japan. Mexico's medical infrastructure is highly rated for the most part and is usually excellent in major cities, but rural communities still lack equipment for advanced medical procedures, forcing patients in those locations to travel to the closest urban areas to get specialized medical care. Social determinants of health can be used to evaluate the state of health in Mexico. State-funded institutions such as Mexican Social Security Institute and the Institute for Social Security and Services for State Workers play a major role in health and social security. Private health services are also very important and account for 13% of all medical units in the country. Medical training is done mostly at public universities, with many specializations done in vocational or internship settings. Some public universities in Mexico, such as the University of Guadalajara, have signed agreements with the US to receive and train American students in medicine. Healthcare costs in private institutions and prescription drugs in Mexico are on average lower than that of its North American economic partners. Painting is one of the oldest arts in Mexico. Cave painting in Mexican territory is about 7,500 years old and has been found in the caves of the Baja California Peninsula. Pre-Columbian Mexican art is present in buildings and caves, in Aztec codices, in ceramics, in garments, etc. Examples of this are the Maya mural paintings of Bonampak or the murals found in Teotihuacan, Cacaxtla, and Monte Alban. Mural painting with Christian religious themes had an important flowering during the 16th century, early colonial era in newly constructed churches and monasteries. Examples can be found in Acolman, Actopan, Huejotzingo, Tecamacalco, and Zainacan Tepic. As with most art during the early modern era in the West, colonial-era Mexican art was religious during the 16th and 17th centuries. Starting in the late 17th century, and, most prominently in the 18th century, secular portraits and images of racial types, so-called casta painting appeared. Important painters of the late colonial period were Juan Correa, Cristobal de Villalpando, and Miguel Cabrera. In early post-independence Mexico, 19th century painting had a marked romantic influence. Landscapes and portraits were the greatest expressions of this era. Hermenegildo Bustos is one of the most appreciated painters of the historiography of Mexican art. Other painters include Santiago Ribal, Felix Parra, Eugenio Landizio, and his noted pupil, the landscape artist José María Velasco. In the 20th century, artists such as Diego Rivera, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and José Clemente Orozco, the so-called Big Three of Mexican muralism, achieved worldwide recognition. They were commissioned by the Mexican government to paint large-scale historical murals on the walls of public buildings, which helped shape popular perceptions of the Mexican Revolution and Mexican cultural identity. 328. Frida Kahlo's largely personal portraiture is considered by many as the most important historical work by a female artist. In the 21st century, Mexico City became home to the highest concentration of art museums in the world. Institutions like the Museo Jumex, the largest collection of its kind, founded by collector Eugenio López Alonso and bolstered by art advisor Estela Provas, changed the notion of contemporary art in Latin America. The Museo Tamayo Art Contemporaneous, founded by Rufino Tamayo, is also considered a preeminent institution and introduced foreign artists to a wider population. The country is also an epicenter for international art galleries including Curamanzato and FF Projects, and leading artists including Gabriel Orozco, Bosco Sodi, Stefan Bruggeman, and Mario Garcia Torres. Mexican films from the Golden Age in the 1940s and 1950s are the greatest examples of Latin American cinema, with a huge industry comparable to the Hollywood of those years. Mexican films were exported and exhibited in all of Latin America and Europe. Maria Candelaria, 1943, by Emilio Fernandez, was one of the first films awarded a Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival in 1946, the first time the event was held after World War II. The famous Spanish-born director Luis Buñuel realized in Mexico between 1947 and 1965 some of his masterpieces like Los Olvidados, 1949, and Viridiana, 1961. Famous actors and actresses from this period include Maria Felix, Pedro Infante, Dolores del Rio, Jorge Negrete, and the comedian Cantinflas. More recently, films such as Como Agua para Chocolate, 1992, Sex, Shame, and Tears, 1999, Y tu mamá también, 2001, and The Crime of Father Amaro, 2002, have been successful in creating universal stories about contemporary subjects, and were internationally recognized. Mexican directors Alejandro González Iñárritu, Babel, Birdman, The Revenant, Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, Alfonso Cuarón, A Little Princess, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Gravity, Roma, Guillermo del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth, Crimson Peak, The Shape of Water, Nightmare Alley, screenwriter Guillermo Orioga and photographer Emmanuel Lubezki are some of the most known present-day filmmakers. Mexico has a long tradition of music from the pre-Hispanic era to the present. Much of the music from the colonial era was composed for religious purposes. Although the traditions of European opera and especially Italian opera had initially dominated the Mexican music conservatories and strongly influenced native opera composers, in both style and subject matter, elements of Mexican nationalism had already appeared by the latter part of the 19th century with operas such as Anicito Ortega del Villa's 1871 Guatemotzin, a romanticized account of the defense of Mexico by its last Aztec ruler, Cuauhtémoc. The most well-known Mexican composer of the 20th century is Carlos Chávez, 1899–1978, who composed 6 symphonies with indigenous themes and rejuvenated Mexican music, founding the Orquesta Sinfónica Nacional. Traditional Mexican music includes mariachi, banda, norteño, ranchera, and corridos. Corridos were particularly popular during the Mexican Revolution, 1910–20, and in the present era include narco-corridos. The embrace of rock and roll by young Mexicans in the 1960s and 1970s brought Mexico into the transnational, counterculture movement of the era. In Mexico, the native rock culture merged into the larger countercultural and political movement of the late 1960s, culminating in the 1968 protests and redirected into counterculture rebellion, La Onda, the wave. On an everyday basis, most Mexicans listen to contemporary music such as pop, rock, and others in both English and Spanish. Folk dance of Mexico, along with its music, is both deeply regional and traditional. Founded in 1952, the Ballet Folclórico de Mexico performs music and dance of the pre-Hispanic period through the Mexican Revolution in regional attire in the Palacio de Bellas Arts. Telenovelas, or soap operas, are very traditional in Mexico and are translated to many languages and seen all over the world. Mexico was a pioneer in edutainment, with TV producer Miguel Sabido creating in 1970s soap operas for social change. The Sabido method has been adopted in many other countries subsequently, including India, Peru, Kenya, and China. The Mexican government successfully used a telenovela to promote family planning in the 1970s to curb the country's high birth rate. Bilingual government radio stations broadcasting in Spanish and indigenous languages were a tool for indigenous education, 1958–65, and since 1979 the Instituto Nacional Indigenista has established a national network of bilingual radio stations. There was a major reform of the telecommunications industry in 2013, with the creation of new broadcast television channels. There had been a long-standing limitation on the number of networks, with Televisa, with a virtual monopoly, TV Azteca, and Imagen Television. New technology has allowed the entry of foreign satellite and cable companies. Mexico became the first Latin American country to transition from analog to all digital transmissions. Organized sport in Mexico largely dates from the late 19th century, with only bullfighting having a long history dating to the early colonial era. Once the political turmoil of the early republic was replaced by the stability of the Porfiriato, did organized sport become public diversions, with structured and ordered play governed by rules and authorities. Baseball was introduced from the United States and also via Cuba in the 1880s, and organized teams were created. After the Mexican Revolution, the government sponsored sports to counter the international image of political turmoil and violence. 358. Mexico's most popular sport is association football. The bid to host the 1968 Summer Olympics was to burnish Mexico's stature internationally, with it being the first Latin American country to host the Games. The government spent abundantly on sporting facilities and other infrastructure to make the Games a success, but those expenditures helped fuel public discontent with the government's lack of spending on social programs. 358. Mexico City hosted the 19th Olympic Games in 1968, making it the first Latin American city to do so. Mexico hosted the 1970 FIFA World Cup and the 1986 FIFA World Cup and will co-host, along with Canada and the United States, the 2026 FIFA World Cup. With its past hosting of the 1970 and 1986 tournaments, Mexico will become the first country to host or co-host the Men's World Cup 3 times. Mexico is an international power in professional boxing. 14 Olympic boxing medals have been won by Mexico. The Mexican Professional Baseball League is named the Liga Mexicana de Béisbol. While usually not as strong as the United States, the Caribbean countries and Japan, Mexico has nonetheless achieved several international baseball titles. Lucha Libre, freestyle professional wrestling, is also major crowd draw with national promotions such as AAA, CMLL, and others. Despite efforts by animal rights activists to outlaw bullfighting, it remains a popular sport in the country, and almost all large cities have bullrings. Plaza Mexico in Mexico City, which seats 45,000 people, is the largest bullring in the world.